Okay, so I'm going to be covering my strategies. I have my notes ready to go over them. Okay, so my first strategy is strategy 13. I think you say realia. It means real. It's using concrete objects to help build background knowledge and vocab for the student. So it's really using manipulatives and objects and letting them use their senses to understand what they're actually doing. So the best example I could think of, and I actually did this in my geography class the 2 semesters ago, and obviously wouldn't be as in-depth as a college geography class, but anyways, so I thought of a science lab of rock classification. I think in 8th grade science they will learn how to classify rocks based on luster and hardness and things like that. But to bring it down to an ELL standpoint, I thought of a lab. I found one actually of rock classification. It asks things like small questions of one-word answers of like how shiny it is, how dull, smooth, rough, does it look like glass, look like metal, what's the color and size. One-word questions, and that really gets them like looking at it and holding the rocks and getting to visualize different ones and what that looks like, instead of just like hard vocab words of like hardness, is it like the luster of it, and those harder vocab words when classifying rocks. I think that would just be a really great science lesson to use with getting them to use all their senses. Science is an easy one for them to get their use of their senses with smell. Even in my college class, we had to do taste with the rocks. I think there was 2 rocks that actually tasted like salt that helped you classify them based on taste. So it's feel, taste, some rocks smell. That could really help the student understand what they're doing, and it's easy to work in a group or in a science group and be able to explain what they're supposed to do with something like that. So that'd be a great lesson to intertwine relia, I think that's how you say it, into the 50 strategies of an ELL. So my next strategy is strategy 16, which is adjusting questioning so that the student can understand what you're asking. I think this is a big one because even I'm obviously an English speaker, and even with certain questions that I'm asked in life, I don't really understand the question. I think I've said that a lot of times, and once someone rewords the question into a way I can understand it, I usually actually know the answer to it. So I think that's a big one with ELL students, is that maybe they just don't understand the question, but they definitely know the answer. So one example I could think of, or I have 2 examples. I'm going to display a non-ELL question version of it, and then the ELL question of it. So right now in 6th grade math, we're actually learning about adding and subtracting integers. An integer is a whole number and its opposite, which would be a negative number. So for the non-ELL question, I would ask, when I have a minus sign and a negative sign together, what am I actually doing in my equation? And the answer would be adding the 2 integers. So to an ELL student, that may be like super confusing. I think even to people who haven't been in math lately, that might be confusing. So I would change the wording around, not dumb it down, but make it make more sense in a visual sense. So instead of using minus and negative, I would just say dashes, a dash of just a little line. Not really getting to the meaning that it's actually a negative and a minus sign yet, but what that means when you see it in a math question. So the ELL question would be 2 dashes together, which would be my negative and minus sign. 2 dashes together in a problem tells me to do what with my numbers. So I substituted numbers for integers, and I substituted dashes in for a negative and a minus sign. And instead of putting equation, I put the word problem. I think problem is an easy word to understand instead of the big word equation. And then their response could simply just be add them or put them together. One word, two word answers is a big thing when you're trying to get questioning. So like yes, no, another one that I found that I did actually for my other video is at the end of class. This is a different example of something in math, but getting them to hold up a finger based on how they feel at the end of class. So like, can you understand adding and subtracting integers? If you can, put up a 1. If you can almost do it, put up a 2. And if you have no idea, put up a 3. And so that's would be explaining the faces. So if they really got it, they're real happy, kind of almost got it, and then oh my gosh, I have no idea. So also putting with the emotions and the finger motions of how they feel about that, using that questioning of closure to make sure they understand where we're going with the lesson. The second example, or I guess now the third example I have for questioning. So the non-ELL question could sound something like, when I have a negative integer, which way do I move on my number line? So again, I'm using the word negative and integer, which can be confusing. So instead, when I have, for my ELL question, I would write it as, when I have a dash and a number together, which side of my number line do I go on? Displaying a number line on the board, and the response would just simply be the left side. So getting them to recognize which side of a number line a negative number would be on, but keeping it simple and just saying a dash with the number, I think makes it a little more simple. So they recognize it visually before they know what it actually means, that it's a negative number. So it's smaller than a positive, and then slowly getting to that step of what negative and positives really mean. Okay, and my last strategy is strategy 22. This is Cynic's surgery. So Cynic's is actually the order and way a word or a sentence should be ordered in, and that differs between each language. I know for ASL, you always say the adjectives before you say you say the subject before you say the adjectives. So like when you're talking in English, it's like, look at the green sweater. But for like ASL, it's actually sweater and then green. So, and that's because you want to identify what you're talking about before you start to describe it, so the person knows where to look. So it's the same thing with English, is that the words are different. So this is a big one too, with getting them to understand the questions and the sentences they're reading, because sometimes they change, and sometimes the wording can be a little confusing. So one of the best ways it's to clarify what the sentence is asking is to write the sentence on a long paper strip. Okay, so for my example, I made the example of, based on the data above, we're looking at a graph, for which Skittle color had the greatest amount of votes. So the kid will have a graph to visualize, and it's color-coded, but the question of, based on the data above, for which Skittle color had the greatest amount of votes, can be kind of confusing. So what you can do is take that sentence, write it down on a long note card about this big, long, write the whole sentence out, or the whole question, and then all you have to do is just cut it up, allow the student to look at it, and switch around the words to make sense. So if I were cutting up this sentence, I would just say, I would take off probably based on and just put data above. So all they have to do is focus on what's right above the question. So this is your data right here, or the graph, or look at the colored bars, helping them break it down what the data is in this question. So, and then for the second part of the question, it says, for which Skittle color had the greatest amount of votes. So I would take out the word for, and then just put which Skittle color. So now they're only focusing on which color. So we have purple, red, yellow, green, and orange in this example. So now they're just looking at Skittle colors. And then the second part of it, says had the greatest amount of votes. Okay, so saying votes would be the number on the graph, and greatest means the most. Who has the largest number? Large is just a simple vocab word. Greatest can be kind of a bigger word to look at, a lot of letters. So just saying larger number. Which one is the larger number? Or in this case with the graph, you can visualize how tall it is. So maybe, well, which color is the tallest? That's the biggest number. So tall, getting to visualize, well, if you don't understand the number, you can look at that color and see which one's tall, which one's shorter, and being able to get them to realize that on the data. But really breaking down each word of it that they might not understand and rearranging the words in the sentence so it can make more sense.